My name is Alex Thompson. It feels important to state that for the record. To anchor myself to a reality that seems to be slipping away with each passing hour. Before I took this job, I was an urban planner, a man who dealt in concrete grids, traffic flow simulations, and the predictable, organized chaos of city life. My world was one of blueprints and bylaws, a place where every problem had a logical, man-made solution. I found comfort in that order. But order has a way of breaking down, not just in cities, but in a man's life. After a particularly brutal year, a dissolved engagement and the quiet, lingering illness of my father, the city I had helped shape began to feel like a cage of my own design. The noise was no longer a symphony of life, but a cacophony of failures. The towering buildings didn't represent ambition anymore. They just cast long, suffocating shadows. I needed an escape. Not a vacation, but a fundamental severing from the world I knew. I craved silence, isolation, a place where the only demands were primal and simple. When I saw the posting for a fire lookout in the heart of Blackwood National Forest, it felt less like a job opportunity and more like a lifeline. 6 months of solitude. The description read, vigilance, self-sufficiency, and a comfort with isolation are essential. I was all of those things, or at least, I desperately wanted to be. The hiring process was surprisingly remote and impersonal. A few emails, a background check, and a single, crackly phone call with a man who introduced himself only as Mr. Henderson. His voice was gravelly, tired, as if he'd spent a lifetime sighing. He asked me if I was running from something. I gave him a practiced, professional answer about seeking tranquility and reconnecting with nature. He grunted, a sound that conveyed both disbelief and a complete lack of interest. The forest doesn't care about your reasons, Mr. Thompson, he'd said. It only cares that you follow the rules. At the time, I assumed he meant the standard Park Service protocols. I was wrong. The journey to my new home, Watchtower Station 4, was a lesson in gradual erasure. I started on a 4-lane highway, which bled into a 2-lane state road, then a winding county asphalt strip. Soon, that gave way to a gravel road. The stones pinging against the undercarriage of my beat-up sedan like a final, scattered applause from civilization. The last 10 miles were a dirt track, a mere suggestion of a road, hemmed in so tightly by ancient pines that the afternoon sun was reduced to a few dappled coins on the forest floor. My cell phone signal had vanished an hour ago. The radio hissed with static. I was utterly, completely alone. The tower, when I finally saw it, was both magnificent and terrifying. It was a small 12 by 12-foot room, walled with glass, perched atop a skeletal steel frame that rose 100 feet into the air. It stood on a small, rocky clearing on the crest of a mountain, a lone sentinel overlooking a sea of green that stretched to every horizon. It looked like a cage, tossed into the sky. After hauling my gear, 6 months of non-perishable food, books, clothes, and a satellite phone for emergencies only, up the seemingly endless flights of stairs, I finally stepped into my new home. The view was breathtaking. I could see for 100 miles in every direction. Mountains rippled in the distance like the spine of some colossal, sleeping beast. The sheer scale of it was humbling. It made my world of traffic jams and broken hearts feel laughably insignificant. For the first time in a year, I felt a sense of peace. The inside of the tower was Spartan. A single cot, a small desk with a radio console, a wood-burning stove, a propane-powered mini-fridge, and the famous Osborne fire finder. a complex brass instrument of maps and sights used to pinpoint smoke. It was clean, but it held the faint, lingering scent of its previous occupant's old coffee, wood smoke, and something else. Something like old paper and faint, metallic tang of fear. It was while I was putting away my supplies that I found it. Taped to the inside of the food locker door was a single sheet of A4 paper, yellowed and soft with age. It had been laminated poorly, with edges that were peeling and cloudy. On it, written in a frantic, spidery scrawl that shifted from neat block letters to a desperate cursive, was a list. The title, underlined 3 times, read, "Rules for Staying Alive." Read them. Do not break them. I chuckled, pulling the sheet from the door. It felt like a classic rookie hazing prank. This is what it said. 1. The hatch to the ground stairs must be locked from the inside no later than sunset. Check the lock twice. There are no second chances. 2. Between the hours of midnight and 4 a.m., you may hear sounds from below. Familiar sounds. A crying child, a woman singing, a dog barking. It is the forest testing you. It is not real. Do not open the hatch. Do not shine your light down there. Acknowledge it, and you make it real. 3. If you see a fire you know isn't a fire, one that moves too fast, or burns with a color that isn't natural, blue, green, purple, do not log it as a fire. Do not look at it for more than a few seconds. In your morning report, log it as atmospheric interference or unconfirmed seismic light. They will know what it means. Sometimes in the rain, you will see a face in the glass looking in. It will not have eyes. Do not scream. Do not react. It is only a reflection of your own fear. It feeds on acknowledgement. Turn your back to it and focus on your duties. It will eventually fade. 5. Do not leave the tower during a thunderstorm. The lightning is the least of your worries. 6. If you hear your own voice calling for help from the woods, it is not you. It is learning. Stay inside. 7. Once a month, on the new moon, leave a portion of your rations on the platform outside the hatch. A can of meat, some salted crackers. It must be salted. Do not watch to see what takes it. In the morning it will be gone. This is a payment. Do not miss a payment. I read the list twice, a wide grin spreading across my face. It was elaborate. I had to give them that. We face in the glass. Unconfirmed seismic light. It was wonderfully creative. The previous lookout must have been a budding horror writer, slowly going mad from the isolation. I folded the paper, tucked it into the back of a logbook on the desk, and forgot about it. The first day was idyllic. I organized my space, tested the radio equipment, and spent hours just watching the clouds drift across the vast, empty sky. As dusk began to bleed purple and orange across the horizon, I remembered the first rule on the list. The hatch must be locked by sunset. I hesitated. It was absurd. The hatch was a heavy steel trapdoor at the top of the stairs, leading onto the small catwalk that wrapped around the cabin. The only way up or down. Locking it felt silly, melodramatic. But then, a breeze rattled the glass panes of the tower, a low, mournful sound. The forest was darkening, the endless trees melting into a single, impenetrable shadow. The feeling of peace I'd had earlier was being replaced by a profound sense of exposure. I was 100 feet in the air, in a glass box, miles from another human being. Just for the hell of it, I muttered to myself. I walked out onto the catwalk. The wind was colder now. I pulled the heavy trapdoor shut. It closed with a deep, resonating thump. I then slid the thick steel bolt across. It was an old, heavy mechanism that took some effort. It clicked into place with a sound of absolute finality. For good measure, as the rules suggested, I checked it twice. It was solid. Back inside, I made myself some instant coffee and settled in with a book. The sun vanished completely, and a darkness unlike any I had ever known fell over the world. There were no city lights, no street lamps, just an inky, star-dusted blackness. The silence was absolute. At first, around 9 p.m., I heard the first sound. A faint tick, tick, tick against the steel of the catwalk outside. I rationalized it instantly. A branch carried by the wind. A bird. But the sound was rhythmic. It moved along the catwalk towards the hatch. Then came a soft, scraping sound. Scry-ape, like fingernails dragging on metal. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. This was ridiculous. It was an animal. A raccoon, maybe. They could climb anything. I stood up, my coffee forgotten, and listened. The scraping stopped right over the spot where the hatch was. Then came the tapping. 3 distinct, deliberate taps on the steel door. Tap, tap, not an animal. Animals don't knock. I froze, every muscle in my body tense. My mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation. Mr. Henderson playing a prank. Did he hike all the way out here in the dark just to scare the new guy? It seemed impossible. The sound was too close, too immediate. I crept towards the door that led from the cabin to the catwalk. My hand hovered over the doorknob. The rule flashed in my mind. Do not open the hatch. This wasn't the hatch, but it led to it. I stayed my hand. I stood there, in the dark, for what felt like eternity, just listening. The silence returned, now heavier, more menacing than before. Whatever was out there was waiting. After 10 minutes of absolute stillness, I finally convinced myself it was my imagination. My city, frayed nerves playing tricks on me in this new, unnerving environment. I tried to go back to my book, but the words swam before my eyes. Every creak of the tower, every sigh of the wind, sent a fresh jolt of adrenaline through me. I decided to turn in early, hoping sleep would reset my sanity. I was drifting in that shallow space, between wakefulness and sleep when the second sound began. It was just after midnight. It was a voice. A woman's voice, faint, carried on the wind from the forest below. It was singing a lullaby, a tune I vaguely recognized but couldn't place. It was beautiful, but its presence here, in this impossible wilderness, was monstrous. Rule Fate 2. You may hear sounds from below. Familiar sounds. It is not real. My blood ran cold. This couldn't be happening. It was a prank. It had to be a prank. A hidden speaker somewhere. Some elaborate system set up to terrify the lookouts. Then the voice changed. It stopped singing. It started to speak. And it spoke my name. It was Sarah's voice, my ex-fiancée. The sound of her voice, so clear, so perfect, hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't just a recording. It had all her inflections. The slight lilt when she was worried. The soft timbre that I had fallen in love with. Alex, can you hear me? I'm down here. My car broke down. I was so worried. I came to find you. I shot upright in my cot, my heart a frantic drum. My mind was a battlefield. One side, the logical planner, screamed that this was impossible. Sarah was 1,000 miles away. She didn't even know exactly where this tower was. The other side of my brain, the part that still ached for her, was being ripped apart. It sounded so real, so desperate.
Alex, please! It's dark and I'm scared!
I can see your light. Please, just answer me. Her voice called, closer now. It sounded like it was right at the base of the tower. I wanted to run to the radio. I wanted to scream her name into the microphone. I wanted to throw open the hatch and shine my flashlight down and find her. My hand was shaking, reaching for the heavy-duty torch on my desk. Acknowledge it, and you make it real. The words from the list echoed in my head, a cold counterpoint to Sarah's desperate pleas. This was the test. The forest testing me. What the hell did that even mean?
Please, Alex! I love you! Don't leave me out here!
The voice broke, turning into a sob. A sob I had heard before during our final, tear-filled argument. It was a sound precision engineered to destroy me. I clamped my hands over my ears, squeezing my eyes shut. Not real, not real, not real. I whispered, the words a desperate mantra. It was a trick. A hallucination brought on by the altitude and the isolation. But it was so perfect. The thing in the woods, whatever it was, it had reached into my memories and pulled out my most painful, vulnerable moments. The sobbing continued for what felt like hours. I stayed on my cot trembling, fighting the overwhelming urge to respond. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. To deny that sound, to deny that part of myself that wanted to believe she was there, was a form of torture. Finally, as the first hint of gray light began to soften the eastern sky, the voice faded away, replaced by the natural, waking sounds of the forest. I was drenched in a cold sweat, utterly exhausted but wide awake. I stumbled to the window and looked out. The sea of trees was calm, shrouded in a gentle morning mist. There was no broken down car, no footprints in the damp earth around the tower's base that I could see from my vantage point. Nothing. My eyes fell on the logbook on the desk, with the laminated list of rules tucked inside. It wasn't a prank. I knew that now. It wasn't the ramblings of a madman. It was a survival guide. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me, more than the mountain air, that this was only the beginning. There were still so many rules left to learn. Sleep did not come. After the voice of my dead fiancé faded with the dawn, I was left in a state of hyper-vigilant exhaustion. The sun rose, painting the vast wilderness in hues of gold and rose, a sight that would have filled me with profound joy just 24 hours earlier. Now, it only served to illuminate the stage of my terror. The beauty of the forest felt like a mask, a beautiful face, hiding something ancient and predatory. I spent the first hour of daylight with the laminated list spread out on the desk, my coffee growing cold beside it. The smudged, desperate handwriting no longer seemed like a joke. It was a testament, a warning from a predecessor who had either died here or fled in terror. I was an urban planner. I believed in systems, in cause and effect, in rules that govern the physical world. But the rules on this page were of a different kind. They weren't about safety protocols or park regulations. They were about managing the paranormal, about navigating a reality that operated on a logic of pure nightmare. My day was a strange mix of the mundane and the terrifying. I performed my duties with robotic precision, my mind a million miles away. Every 15 minutes, I would stand, walk a slow circle around the glass-walled room, and scan the horizon with my binoculars. I noted the wind's speed, the cloud cover, the humidity, logging it all in a neat, steady hand that betrayed the tremor in my soul. The routine was a flimsy shield against the paranoia that was taking root in my heart. Every gust of wind was the prelude to a whisper. Every shadow that danced among the trees was a figure watching me. The forest was no longer a collection of trees. It was a single, living entity, and I was a foreign body it was trying to expel. The day remained clear and bright, a blessing I did not take for granted. The thought of rain, of clouds obscuring my view, filled me with a primal dread. The sun was my only ally, keeping the deepest shadows at bay. The silence, which I had craved, was now my enemy. It was an empty canvas on which my fear painted 1,000 horrifying possibilities. Late in the afternoon, my routine was shattered. I was scanning the northern ridge, a dense stretch of old-growth pine about 10 miles out. And then I saw it. Smoke. Except it wasn't smoke. It was a thin, vertical pillar of something. I raised the binoculars, my knuckles white. Rule Fate 3. If you see a fire you know isn't a fire, one that moves too fast, or burns with a color that isn't natural, blue, green, purple, do not log it as a fire. This fire was purple, a deep, sickening violet, like a bruise on the sky. It didn't billow or plume like a real fire. It stood in a perfectly straight, unwavering column. It didn't flicker, it pulsed with a slow, rhythmic beat, like a diseased heart. My training screamed at me to get on the radio, to call in the coordinates, to report the blaze before it could spread. That was my job, my entire purpose for being here. But the rule held me back. I watched, mesmerized and horrified, as the violet column began to move. It slid through the forest, impossibly fast, not consuming the trees but passing through them. The ancient pines were untouched by its passage. It moved against the wind, a flagrant violation of physics. I kept the binoculars trained on it, and a wave of nausea washed over me. Looking at it felt wrong, like trying to comprehend a shape that shouldn't exist. It seemed to bend the light around it, and for a terrifying second, I thought I saw things moving within the violet light. Writhing, indistinct forms that my brain refused to process. Do not look at it for more than a few seconds. I tore the binoculars from my eyes, my heart pounding. I stumbled back from the window, gasping for breath. My eyes ached. I could still see the violet afterimage burned onto my retinas. I felt a profound sense of violation, as if that unnatural light had seen me, had looked back at me through the lenses and marked me. My hands shook as I sat at the desk to fill out the daily report. Under the section for observations, my pen hovered. My duty, my entire professional history, told me to describe what I saw. But the frantic scrawl on the laminated page whispered a different instruction. Log it as atmospheric interference or unconfirmed seismic light. They will know what it means, they. Who were they? Mr. Henderson, the Park Service, or some other, shadowier organization that understood the true nature of this forest. With a sense of dread and complicity, I wrote 4:17 p.m. Unconfirmed seismic light observed on northern ridge. Lasted approximately 2 minutes. No further activity. The words felt like a lie and a prayer. I had followed the rule. I could only hope it was enough. As evening approached, the sky began to curdle. The brilliant blue was swallowed by a mass of bruised-looking clouds that rolled in from the west. The temperature dropped. The wind began to howl, a low, mournful cry that vibrated through the steel frame of the tower. A storm was coming. Rule Fate 5. Do not leave the tower during a thunderstorm. The lightning is the least of your worries. I checked the bolt on the hatch for the 3rd time since sunset. It was secure. The first fat drops of rain began to spatter against the glass, and soon it was a torrential downpour, a wall of water that erased the world. The lightning started, silent flashes that lit the landscape in stark, monochrome detail, followed seconds later by claps of thunder, so loud they shook the tower to its foundations. I felt like a sailor in a crow's nest, tossed on a stormy sea. I tried to distract myself by making dinner. I was chopping vegetables on a small cutting board. The rhythmic thud of the knife, a small, solid sound in the chaos of the storm. The propane lamp cast a warm, flickering glow inside the cabin, a tiny island of light in an ocean of darkness and fury. That's when I saw it. Rule 84. Sometimes, in the rain, you will see a face in the glass, looking in. It will not have eyes. It was in my peripheral vision at first. A pale smudge against the rain-streaked glass, a trick of the light. But it didn't go away. I forced myself to keep chopping. Thud. Thud. Carrot, celery, onion, normal things. I am a normal person doing a normal thing. Do not scream. Do not react. I slowly, deliberately finished chopping the onion and placed the knife down on the cutting board. I did not turn my head. I looked straight ahead, at the cupboard in front of me, but I could still see the shape in the corner of my eye. It was a face. A human face pressed against the glass, 10 feet from where I stood. It was pale, unnaturally smooth, and where its eyes should have been, there was only blank, unblemished skin. Its mouth was slightly open, as if in a state of placid surprise. The rain streamed down the glass over it, making it look like it was weeping. My breath hitched. A cold, paralyzing terror seized me. It was one thing to hear a voice from the darkness below. It was another to have something right here, outside my window, watching me. 100 feet up in the air, in the middle of a raging thunderstorm. It is only a reflection of your own fear. It feeds on acknowledgement. I fought every instinct in my body. The urge to scream, to run, to grab the heavy fire extinguisher and smash the thing against the glass. But the rule was clear. Reaction was a form of nourishment. Acknowledgement was an invitation. So I did the hardest thing I could imagine. I turned my back to it. My heart was a frantic bird beating against the cage of my ribs. I walked on trembling legs to the small stove, my back to the window where the eyeless face was watching. I lit the burner, my hand shaking so badly it took 3 tries. I poured the vegetables into the pan. The sizzle was deafening in the charged silence of the cabin. I stirred them. I focused on the task, on the smell of the onions cooking, on the feel of the wooden spoon in my hand. Anything to anchor me to reality. I could feel its presence behind me. I could feel its non-gaze on my back. Was it just a reflection? A hallucination? Or was there truly a creature clinging to the outside of my tower, 100 feet from the ground, waiting patiently for me to look at it? I didn't know which was worse. I did not turn around. I cooked my meal. I ate it, forcing the food down my tight throat, each bite tasting of ash and fear. I cleaned my plate. I prepared my cot for bed. All the while the storm raged, and I refused to look at the window. I refused to give it the satisfaction. I could feel it there for at least an hour. A patient, silent, eyeless presence. Then, as abruptly as it appeared, the feeling was gone. The pressure on the back of my neck lifted. I waited another 30 minutes before I dared to risk a glance. I turned slowly. The window was empty, showing only the rain and the occasional blinding flash of lightning. It was gone. It had faded. I had passed the test. The relief was so intense it left me weak. I collapsed onto my cot, the adrenaline leaving me shaky and nauseous. I had survived another night, another rule. But the victory felt hollow. I wasn't winning. I was just surviving, for now. The forest was testing me, yes, but it also felt like it was teaching me. And I was terrified of the lessons to come. As the storm began to subside, replaced by a steady, drumming rain, I lay in the darkness, listening. And just as I was about to drift into a shallow, uneasy sleep, I heard a new sound. It came from the woods, far below, but it was unnervingly clear. It was a voice. A man's voice, weak and filled with pain. "Help me," it cried. "Please, somebody help me." I froze, every muscle tensing. It wasn't the voice of a stranger. I knew it intimately. It was my own. The voice, my voice, cried out again, a perfect echo of my own timbre, laced with a convincing tremor of pain. "I've fallen. I think my leg is broken." Rule Face 6. If you hear your own voice calling for help from the woods, it is not you. It is learning. Stay inside. The last two words of that rule were the most terrifying. It is learning. Sarah's voice had been a weaponized memory, something pulled from my past. But this was different. This was mimicry. It implied observation. The thing in the forest hadn't just rifled through my psyche. It had listened to me. Perhaps it heard me muttering to myself, or testing the radio, or cursing as I stubbed my toe. It had recorded the sound of me, and now it was playing it back as a lure. I lay frozen on my cot, every muscle locked. To hear your own voice begging for help is a profoundly disorienting experience. It bypasses reason and strikes at a primal instinct for self-preservation. My mind knew it was a trick, a phantom. The rules had warned me, but my body reacted against my will. My heart hammered, my muscles tensed as if preparing to run towards the sound. It was a biological imperative to save oneself, twisted into a psychological weapon. "Please." My voice pleaded from the darkness below. Closer this time, as if it were at the base of the tower's steel legs. "I'm bleeding. It's so cold." I pressed the heels of my palms into my eye sockets, trying to crush the sound out of existence. The thing wasn't just mimicking my voice, it was mimicking my fear. It knew what a person in distress would say. It was improvising. The learning was happening in real time. What would it learn next? Would it start whispering my private thoughts? Would it call out the name of my father? His voice weak and sick, just as I remembered it from the hospital. The voice continued its desperate monologue for nearly an hour. It described the supposed injury in gruesome detail. It begged for water. It whimpered. Each word was a perfect copy of my own vocal patterns. I didn't answer. I didn't move. I just lay there, a prisoner in my glass cage, listening to myself die in the woods below. It was a new kind of torture, more intimate and violating than the eyeless face or the spectral fire. This was an attack on my very identity. The sun, when it finally arrived, felt less like a reprieve and more like an intermission. The terror didn't vanish, it just retreated into the shadows, waiting for its next cue. I rose from the cot feeling like an old man, my joints aching, my mind afraid not of paranoia and exhaustion. I performed my morning duties in a haze. Scanned the horizon, logged the weather, checked the radio. The mundane routine was the only thing keeping me from screaming. The forest looked peaceful, almost mocking in its serenity. The trees stood silent, holding their secrets. Was it one entity, or many? Was the eyeless face the same thing that mimicked my voice? Or was this forest a crowded metropolis of horrors, each with its own territory and hunting methods? The laminated list was my only guide, a crude map of a hostile country. My eyes fell on the calendar I had tacked to the wall. I had been marking off the days, a ritual to maintain my sanity. I counted the excess. It had been almost a month. My gaze drifted to the lunar cycle printed at the bottom of the page. My blood went cold. Tonight was the new moon. Rule Feint 7, once a month on the new moon. Leave a portion of your rations on the platform outside the hatch. A can of meat, some salted crackers. It must be salted. Do not watch to see what takes it. In the morning it will be gone. This is a payment. Do not miss a payment. A payment. The word implied a transaction, a contract. I wasn't just a lookout, I was a tenant. And the rent was due. The rule was specific. A can of meat. Salted crackers. The salt seemed important. In folklore, salt was a ward against evil, a symbol of purity. But here, it was a seasoning for a monster's dinner. The day crawled by. Each tick of the clock a countdown to the ritual I would have to perform. The fear was different now. It wasn't the reactive terror of a sudden event. It was the slow, grinding dread of anticipation. I had to willingly participate. I had to open the hatch after dark, the one thing I had been conditioned to never, ever do. I selected the items from my meager pantry: a can of corned beef hash, a sleeve of saltine crackers. I held them in my hands. They felt impossibly heavy, like a king's tribute to a dragon. This was my offering, my payment. What was I paying for? Another month of life? Or was I just buying another month of torment? The final line of the rule echoed in my mind: do not miss a payment. The implication was clear. Missing a payment would be worse than anything I had yet experienced. As sunset approached, I felt a new level of anxiety. The sky was clear tonight. No storm to hide behind. Just a vast, star-filled emptiness. I locked the hatch at the prescribed time. The heavy thump and click of the bolt doing little to soothe my nerves. I knew that in a few hours I would have to undo it. I ate my own dinner. A tasteless bowl of rice and beans. My stomach churning. I tried to read, but the words were a meaningless jumble. All I could think about was the platform, just outside my door, on the other side of the hatch. The offering plate. The hours passed in agonizing slowness. I waited until I was sure it was deep into the night. According to my watch, it was 1 a.m. The forest was silent. No voices, no tapping, no singing. It was as if the entire wilderness was holding its breath, waiting. It was time. My hands were slick with sweat. I took the can of hash and the crackers and placed them by the hatch. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my racing heart. "You can do this, Alex," I whispered, and the sound of my own voice, my real voice, was a small comfort. I reached for the bolt. It felt ice cold to the touch. Sliding it back was the loudest sound I had ever heard. A deafening shriek of metal on metal that seemed to echo across the entire forest. I paused, listening. Nothing. With trembling hands, I lifted the heavy steel hatch. It opened onto the catwalk, revealing a square of night sky, glittering with a billion indifferent stars. The cold mountain air rushed in, smelling of pine and damp earth, and of something else. A faint, musky odor, like a wet animal and rich soil. Do not watch to see what takes it. This was the hardest part. I had to place the food outside, into the darkness, and trust that the rule was absolute. The urge to peer over the edge, to shine my flashlight down the stairs, to see what I was feeding, was almost overwhelming. My curiosity was a physical itch, a burning need to know. But the memory of the eyeless face, of the violet fire, of my own voice begging for help, held me back. Knowledge, in this place, was a poison. I knelt, keeping my eyes fixed on the interior of the cabin. I reached out, my arm plunging into the cold night air, and placed the can and the crackers on the steel grating of the catwalk, just outside the opening. My fingers brushed against the cold metal, and I snatched my hand back as if I'd been burned. I pulled the hatch closed immediately. It landed with a deep, final boom that shook the floor. I didn't wait. I slammed the bolt home, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I scrambled back from the hatch, my back hitting the far wall of the cabin. And then I listened. For a long time, there was only silence. The wind sighed around the tower. I began to think that maybe I had imagined it all. Maybe the rule was just another part of the psychological warfare. Then I heard it. It wasn't a footstep. It wasn't the sound of an animal sniffing or chewing. It was a wet, dragging sound from below. A sound of something heavy and soft being pulled up the steel stairs. Shlump, shlump, shlump. It was slow, laborious, and it was getting closer. I huddled against the wall, making myself as small as possible, my eyes screwed shut. The dragging sound stopped right below the hatch. There was a long, drawn-out silence. I could hear my own blood roaring in my ears. Then, a soft, delicate tink sound. The sound of something tapping the can of meat. It was followed by a low, guttural noise, a wet, satisfied, sounding exhalation that seemed to vibrate through the floor. It wasn't the sound of any animal I had ever heard. A moment later, I heard a dry, cracking sound. The crackers, the sound was methodical, unhurried. It was eating. The thing I was paying rent to was just outside my door, having its monthly meal. I stayed perfectly still, hardly daring to breathe. The image of the eyeless face pressed against the glass flashed in my mind. Was it the same creature? Was that what I was feeding? The feeding sounds continued for about 5 minutes, then they stopped. I heard the wet, dragging sound again, moving away from the hatch, descending the stairs. Schlump, schlump, low schlump. It faded back into the silence of the forest. I didn't move for the rest of the night. I sat there on the floor, my back against the wall, until the sun came up. I had survived. I had made the payment. When the sky was a safe, bright blue, I forced myself to approach the hatch. I unbolted it and lifted it, squinting in the morning light. The catwalk was empty. The can and the cracker sleeve were gone. There was no trace of them ever having been there. Except for one thing. On the cold steel of the platform, right where I had left the food, was a single, long, black feather. It was nearly 2 feet long, impossibly dark. And it seemed to drink the light around it. It wasn't from any bird I could identify. As I reached down to touch it, it dissolved into a puff of fine, gray ash that the morning breeze immediately carried away. The payment had been accepted, but the receipt it left behind told me that my landlord was something far stranger and older than I could ever have imagined. The week following the new moon payment was a profound and unsettling silence. The forest seemed to be sleeping, or perhaps digesting. There were no voices on the wind, no taps on the hatch, no unnatural fires painting the horizon. The quiet should have been a relief, a return to the tranquility I had originally sought. Instead, it was the most unnerving period yet. It was the silence of a predator lying in wait, the tense stillness before a pounce. The horrors were no longer just happening to me. I was now part of the system. I had paid my rent. I had a place in this terrible ecosystem, and the knowledge of that complicity was a heavier burden than any sudden fright. My days were spent in a state of obsessive vigilance. I abandoned the novels I had brought with me. My only reading material was the laminated list of rules. I studied it for hours, the frantic handwriting now as familiar as my own. I analyzed every word, every turn of phrase, searching for hidden meanings, for loopholes. Were these rules designed to keep me alive? Or were they merely a set of instructions for how to be a better victim, how to prolong the game for my tormentors? The feather, or the memory of it, haunted me. It wasn't a thing of this world. It was a receipt, a token of a transaction I didn't understand. What kind of creature had feathers that dissolved into ash? What kind of landlord required payment in salted meat? The questions circled in my mind. A flock of vultures over a dying animal. I started a new logbook, separate from the official one. In it, I documented everything: the sounds, the sights, the feelings. I wrote down my theories about the eyeless face, the mimic, the thing that dragged itself up the stairs. I drew a crude map of the area, marking the location of the violet fire. The journal became my new religion, my only confidant. Writing it all down felt like an act of defiance, a way of asserting my own reality against the one the forest was trying to impose on me. One afternoon, about 2 weeks after the payment, I was cleaning the cabin, a desperate attempt to impose some order on my fragmenting world. I was wiping down the inside of the food locker, the same place I had first found the list. As my cloth passed over the metal door, I felt a strange texture beneath it. I stopped, looking closer. There, etched into the steel as if by acid, were words. Faint, spidery, and not part of the original manufacturing. They were names: Thomas Albright, 1978, Eleanor Vance, 1982, Samuel Pike, 1991, David Chen, 2004, Rachel Weisz, 2016. A list of my predecessors, a list of the people who had written the rules, who had made the payments, who had listened to the voices. Where were they now? Had they served their 6 months and escaped? Or were their names on this door, because this tower was their tombstone? The last name, Rachel Weisz, from 2016, sent a particular chill down my spine. The handwriting on the laminated list was frantic, shifting. Was it one person's descent into madness? Or was it the combined effort of all these people, each one adding a new rule, as the forest revealed a new horror? Had Rachel Weisz written the rule about your own voice calling from the woods? Had Samuel Pike been the first to see the eyeless face? The discovery of the names broke the dam of my composure. I was not the first. I was just the latest in a long, tragic line. The solitude I had craved was a lie. This tower was crowded with ghosts. That night, something changed. I was sitting at the desk, staring at the list under the glow of my propane lamp. I knew its 7 rules by heart. I could recite them in my sleep. But as I stared at the yellowed, laminated paper, I thought I saw a flicker. A trick of the light. I blinked, rubbing my tired eyes. I looked again. It was not a trick. Below the 7th rule, new words were appearing. They weren't being written. They were bleeding into existence. The ink appearing on the paper from nowhere. A dark stain spreading slowly, forming letters. I watched, my breath caught in my throat, my blood turning to ice as the 8th rule materialized. 8. If the radio whispers your name when it's off, answer it. Tell it one true secret. A lie will cost you your tongue. I recoiled from the desk as if the list were radioactive. This was impossible. The paper was laminated. Nothing could get in or out. But the rule was there, as clear and undeniable as the others, written in the same spidery, desperate hand. The list was alive. It was a living document, updating itself as the forest devised new torments. A lie will cost you your tongue. The specificity of the punishment was what terrified me most. It wasn't vague like, there are no second chances. It was a direct, physical threat, a promise of mutilation. For the next 3 days I lived in fear of the radio. The large, old-fashioned console sat on the desk like a dormant beast. It was my only official link to the outside world, to Mr. Henderson and the Park Service. I had to use it for my morning and evening check-ins. Every time I touched the power switch, my hand trembled. I kept my reports brief, my voice a strained monotone, terrified that any stray word, any hint of emotion, might be considered a secret. On the third night, it happened. I was reading my journal, trying to find some pattern in the chaos. The radio was off. The power switch was down. The cabin was silent save for the gentle sighing of the wind, and then a crackle of static, soft but unmistakable. I froze, my pen hovering over the page. The static crackled again, and then a voice breathed from the speaker. It was a dry, sibilant whisper, like dead leaves skittering across pavement. Alex. My heart stopped. It was here. The moment from the new rule. The radio was off. It had no power. But it was speaking. I stared at it, my mind a blank wall of panic. I wanted to smash it, to tear its wires out, to throw it from the top of the tower. But the rule was absolute. Answer it. Alex. The whisper came again, more insistent this time. Tell me. A secret. My throat was as dry as dust. A secret? A true secret. My mind raced. What could I tell it? My life was an open book of failures. My failed engagement with Sarah. The thing that mimicked her voice already knew about that. My professional disappointments. Too shallow. It had to be something real. Something that carried weight. Something that would satisfy a thing that could make ink bleed through plastic. A lie will cost you your tongue. I thought of my father. I thought of his last days in the sterile, white hospital room. The air thick with the smell of antiseptic and decay. I thought of the moment that had haunted my waking and sleeping hours ever since. The secret I had never spoken aloud, not even to myself. My hand shaking, I reached out and keyed the microphone. The button felt cold, alien. I brought it to my lips. I'm here, I whispered, my voice hoarse. The static on the radio hissed expectantly. My father, I began, the words tearing themselves from my throat. He was dying. The cancer had taken everything. He couldn't speak, couldn't move. The doctors said it was only a matter of days. He was on a morphine drip for the pain. I paused, taking a ragged breath. The memory was so vivid. It was like I was back in that room. The night he died, I was alone with him. The nurse had just left. He was struggling to breathe. Each breath was a rattling sound. A wet, horrible sound. He looked at me. He couldn't speak, but his eyes were begging me. He was in so much pain. He just wanted it to be over. Tears were streaming down my face now, hot against my cold skin. The morphine drip had a button. I confessed, the secret spilling out of me like poison. A button for an extra dose, for breakthrough pain. The nurse told me not to touch it. She said his heart was too weak. But he was looking at me, and he was in such agony. I choked on a sob. I pressed it. I pressed the button. I held his hand, and I pressed the button twice. He stopped breathing a minute later. The doctor said his heart gave out. They said it was peaceful. But it wasn't. I killed him. I killed my own father to stop the noise he was making. I let go of the microphone button. The secret was out, hanging in the dead air of the cabin, offered up to the thing in the radio. I felt hollowed out, utterly exposed. The radio was silent for a long moment. I waited for a voice, for a judgment, for a sign that my offering had been accepted. But it wasn't a voice that came from the speaker. It was a sound. A wet, rattling sound. The sound of a man's last, labored breath. struggling against lungs filled with fluid. It was the exact sound my father had made in his final moments. A sound I had spent a year trying to forget, now amplified, broadcast into my tiny room, as clear and as real as if he were died on a cot behind me. The sound played on a loop over and over again. Gasp. Rattle. Rattle. I screamed. I scrambled back away from the desk, my hands over my ears, but I couldn't block it out. It was inside my head. The forest didn't just know my secrets, it could play them back to me. It could make me relive my worst moments. The rattling breath finally faded, leaving behind a silence more terrifying than the noise. I was on the floor, curled into a ball, shaking uncontrollably. I had survived. I had told a true secret. I had kept my tongue. But I had lost something far more precious. A piece of my soul. After what felt like an eternity, I forced myself to look up, back at the desk, back at the laminated list. My eyes widened in horror. The ink was bleeding again. Slowly, inexorably. Below the 8th rule, a new line of text was beginning to form. 9. The list is complete. One name must be added so one can be removed. The tower requires a watcher. If you wish to leave, you must find another to take your place. Use the radio. Tell them about the view. I read the final rule once, then twice. The words swam, then snapped into a focus so sharp, so cruel, that it felt like a physical blow. This wasn't a survival guide. It had never been a survival guide. It was a contract, a set of terms and conditions for a job I hadn't understood I was applying for. The Watcher of Station 4. My blood ran cold, a glacial flood of understanding. The names on the door. They weren't victims, not in the way I'd thought. They were employees who had successfully tendered their resignation. Rachel Weiss hadn't died here in 2016. She had found me. David Chen had found her. And so on back through the decades. A chain of desperate souls, luring the next into the trap to buy their own freedom. I scrambled to the food locker, my movements clumsy with panic. I ran my trembling fingers over the etched names. Thomas Albright, 1978. The name was gone. The metal where it had been was smooth, unblemished, as if it had never existed. One name removed. A position had opened up. My position. The job wasn't to watch for fires. The job was to be an anchor, a sacrifice. A payment of presence to whatever ancient things lived in this forest. The rules weren't to protect me from them. They were to make me a more effective, long-lasting offering. My escape from the city, from my life, was a cosmic joke. I had fled a cage of concrete and regret, only to lock myself in a much smaller one, 100 feet in the air, surrounded by a prison of trees that stretched to the horizon. My options laid themselves bare in the stark, cold light of the cabin. I could refuse. I could smash the radio, burn the list, and wait. But what would happen then? Would my name simply appear on the door? My consciousness joining the chorus of whispers and phantoms? Would I become the eyeless face, forever pressed against the glass, watching my replacement? Or would the thing that dragged itself up the stairs for its monthly payment finally come inside for a more permanent meal? Or I could accept the terms. I could become a monster to save myself. I could use the radio, the very instrument of my torture, to craft a lie. I could sing a siren song of peace and solitude, of escape and tranquility. I could find another broken person, another soul running from their life, and lead them here to take my place. I would be free, but I would never be clean. For days, I was paralyzed. I paced the small cabin like a caged animal, the 10 feet from window to window my entire world. I looked at the satellite phone. My one emergency link to the outside world. Could I call for help? Could I tell them the truth? I imagined the conversation. Hello. Yes. My name is Alex Thompson. I'm in Watchtower 4. The forest is alive, the rulebook is magic. And my dead fiancé's voice is trying to lure me outside. Please send help. They would think I'd gone mad from the isolation. And even if they believed me, even if they sent a helicopter, what then? I imagined the violet fire lashing out, or the thing with ashen feathers swatting it from the sky. The rules were absolute. There was no escape outside the system. My reflection in the dark glass showed a stranger, gaunt with a wild beard and eyes that held the haunted look of a man who had seen too much. I was no longer Alex Thompson, urban planner. I was the Watcher. The choice, when it came, was not a dramatic moment of decision. It was a quiet, cold acceptance. A simple calculation of survival. I had already killed my father to stop a sound I couldn't bear. What was one more soul to save my own? I walked to the desk. I sat down. My movements were calm, deliberate. I took my secret journal, the one where I had documented everything, and slid it into the same hiding spot as the laminated list. The next person would need it. Then, I turned on the radio. I switched the frequency from the Park Service channel to a public band, one that might be picked up by long-haul truckers, by hobbyists, by lonely people listening in the dead of night. I took the microphone in my hand. It no longer felt cold. It felt like a tool. I cleared my throat. I thought about what to say, how to craft the perfect lure. I had to sound like the man I had wanted to be when I first came here. A man who had found peace. A man who was whole. I keyed the mic. Hello, I said, my voice smooth, steady, and warm. Is anyone out there? This is a private broadcast. I'm not supposed to be doing this. But I had to tell someone. I paused, letting the silence hang in the air, creating intrigue. I'm calling from a place where the world goes quiet, up in the mountains. I took a job to get away from it all, you know. The noise, the people, the pressure. I thought it might be lonely, but it's not. It's perfect. I let a little wonder creep into my voice. The tone of a man sharing a beautiful secret. You can see the stars so clearly up here. They feel close enough to touch. And the sunsets. Every night, the sky just sets itself on fire. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. I leaned closer to the mic, my voice dropping to an intimate whisper. If you're out there, if you're listening, and if you feel like you're drowning, just know that places like this still exist. Places where you can finally breathe. I stopped, my finger hovering over the button. I had laid the bait. Now for the hook. My term is almost up. I lied, the falsehood sliding from my tongue with terrifying ease. They'll be looking for a replacement soon. I don't know. I just felt like someone out there needed to hear this. I let go of the button. The broadcast was out there, a seed of deception planted in the ether. Now, I just had to wait for a desperate soul to take root. I looked out the window, at the endless sea of trees stretching out under the moonlight. The view was magnificent. It was a sight to die for, and I knew, with a certainty that settled in my bones, like the deepest winter cold, that someone would,